Hello.
There. How you doing?
Good. Let me do my job melody.
Sorry.
Welcome to Brave Space Live, a podcast where we have tough conversations around anti-oppression and communal healing, and we talk about all things in a really simple, easy way to understand. I'm Tyshell. I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner and consultant, and this is my co-host.
Hello, I'm Mel. I'm an author and a social ethicist. It's great to be here with you all.
Welcome back to episode 2. We have a no less hard-hitting topic, and we also have a guest that we'll introduce in a second. But today we're going to talk a little bit about loneliness, capitalism, and how some of that has led to white male rage. And I want to say, as we talked about this topic, we didn't want this topic to come off as like as I said to Mel earlier, and Mel and our guest earlier, the he woman man hating club. So we wanted to actually talk to a person of lived experience, which I encourage everyone to do when you're talking about things. Talk to someone that has lived experience. So we wanted to talk to a man and see what his perspective on these things were. So you didn't just hear us being talking heads talking about men. We'll now talk at one. For your enjoyment. No, I'm just joking. We really just wanted to have somebody, a man, give their perspective on how loneliness and capitalism has led to some white male rage. And he happens to be a white man. So I'll let Mel introduce our guest, and we'll shoot the shit, but we'll shoot the shit with our guest.
Absolutely. So I'm really proud to pronounce you podcast and podcast to introduce you to my good friend Bentley. We've been friends for at least 10 years. We met in grad school. Bentley is the pediatrics chaplain at St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. So that's where he lives with his wife and his 2 adult sons. Before that, he was pastor of a church in California. And then before that, he's worked as a chaplain for people experiencing homelessness. He's worked with a lot of curricular activities for a lot of different groups. I'm just reading through his bio. He told me to make this short. So let's just bring him in here. Bentley Stewart, it's great to have you. Hi, Bentley. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Oh, thank you for having me. So good to be here.
Thank you.
My best qualification is I'm your friend. So yeah, that's good.
Oh, that's a good answer.
Yeah. When he said, earlier he was telling me about his son moving, and he was like, "Yeah, my son is moving," and I was like, "How old is your son?" And then you said he has 2 adult. Like that just kind of blew my mind because like I just think of everybody being like under 40, but maybe.
Yeah, no,
not. That's okay.
No. I graduated high school 30 years ago this year.
Woo!
Yeah.
Nice.
And everyone's like talking about like, where's the high school reunion happening? And everyone's like, not it. Nose goes, I'm not planning it. So
yeah, that's a thing. That's a thing.
Well, you're sporting an impressive beard.
Yes.
You got some salt and pepper in there, so it's very distinguished.
Very
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know how you rock a salt and pepper beard as luxurious as yours in Florida. Like it's warm down there.
It's surprising, but the hair actually wicks away the sweat from the face.
Look at us learning things from a man about his amount of
facial hair. Is that true, or did you just make this up?
Maybe.
So I wanted to this is us shooting the shit. I really just wanted to see how you all have been. Mel, how's your last couple of weeks gone? How are you? What's going on with you?
I'm good. My garden's doing well. I've been annihilating the cabbage worms, trying to eat my Brussels sprouts. The dogs run in the mud every day and they get really gross. But otherwise, I'm just enjoying life. I live on a couple acres in rural Maine, and it's beautiful up here. So the summer is incredible. Got a lot of rain, but it's been just really lovely. Trying to enjoy the summer amidst just lots of work and everything. So yeah. How about you all?
For me, so I put myself on this journey in December I'm a part of the Apple Watch crew, and to close my rings every day. I didn't really have a goal at the time, but when I hit 90 days, I was like, let's see if I can go to 180. So yesterday I closed my rings, which is my exercise ring, my move ring, and my stand ring. So I have to stand at least a couple of minutes for every hour for, I think mine's is set at 14 hours. I have to burn 720 calories. And then I have to exercise for at least 45 minutes a day. I yesterday closed my rings 180 days straight.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Wild to me. And now I'm like, I don't know what the next goal is, maybe 90 more days. I don't know. But I didn't slack off today and just sleep in. I did get up and go to the gym this morning. So I did a HIIT workout.
Nice. How does it know if you're standing up? How does it know?
Your heart rate will drop. When you're sitting, your heart rate's usually like somewhere between 60 something and 80 something. And when you stand, your heart rate's like 90 something. So that's why they say it's better to stand than sit. So I do have an adjustable height desk as well. I don't do it as much as I probably should. But I do try. I just walked my dog for 45 minutes as well. So but it can count your flights of steps. It can count your heart rate, all of those things. I even have an emergency contact on there. So if something happens to me, I think my watch is like shock fall or whatever. So if I like hit the ground and my heart rate drops, then it'll call my husband. Anyway, I closed all my rings for 180 days and I still am going to keep going. So that's what's going on with me.
I'm feeling very inspired right now. That's awesome.
And I'm drinking lots of water.
Look at you.
Look at me.
That's really all I do is I have my emotional support water bottle, and that's my commitment to health.
I love that, and I love that yours also has a sticker. I'm a big sticker person. All my stickers are from Philadelphia things because that's what
okay.
But but I love emotional support water bottle. Bentley, how are you? What have you been up to? I will say that like I didn't just meet you 10 minutes ago. What have you been up to?
What you been up to? So I am a chaplain in a children's hospital. And I did that work before. I was a chaplain in a children's hospital for about 7 years. And then I did other things. And pandemic, like many of us, let's reprioritize our lives. Let's think about what we're doing. And decided I really wanted to get back to that work, that's where I felt the most fulfilled. And so I've only been back in that work for a year. And the Pediatric Chaplains Network has an annual conference. And I went to it. It was just 2 weeks ago. It was in Lake Tahoe. We always pick a nice like resort place to do it at.
As you should.
As you should. And at one point we were in the meeting and like I'm looking at the lake and I'm like, why aren't we out there? But we're supposed to be learning. But then all of a sudden a bear comes up to the window and it's just like, oh, we are in nature. Like not just kind of near nature, but like
we're in here. The bear's like, this is my meeting. I think I'm supposed to be in room 206. Like,
right. But chaplaincy is a weird profession. Pediatric chaplaincy is like niche within niche. And so it was just kind of fun to be with my people and then understand the work and understand the weirdness and can be very, very silly and then serious on a dime and, all those things. So that was really good. My younger son just turned 20. So I no longer have teenagers.
Oh, look at that. They're all grown.
So that I'm trying to figure out what in the world that means.
Nice.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, that's a whole new journey. I will say I am over 30, almost 40, and my mom is like loving she says to us all the time, me and my sisters, I love knowing my children as adults and getting to know who they are. So I bet it's a journey all of its own.
Oh, they're far more interesting now. Yeah, absolutely. And I have two sons, and so we introduced the topic yet? I don't know. Are we still?
We talked a little bit, but I mean, we were gonna get there next. So you can, if you want to dive into what you've been thinking.
Well, I mean, this topic's close to me because I'm raising two young men, and how do I hope that they will inhabit that? How do I hope that they will embody being white men in a world that privileges them in so many different ways? And so I'm happy about who they are and how they show up in the world. So they're good people to know.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing to be able to say about your kids.
Yeah,
Exactly, because you don't want to raise like a jerk. Like that's like
No,
the word
no.
to be like. I will say every time I've worked with in education through the lifespan, and every time I met a kid that was a jerk, it was because one of their parents was like inevitably a jerk, and you meet the kid and you'd be like, oh, that's where you got that personality from.
They learn it from somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's a good reflection on you. So one of the questions, so we'll start with, and you got into the topic, and we'll start with one of the questions that we were talking about and wanting to ask you is like, what are some of the messages that you received over the course of your life of what it meant to be a man? And we'll kind of dive into what it looks like, what loneliness and capitalism, how we see through that. But what are some of the messages that you've received throughout your life?
Sure. I remember my next door neighbor when I was 5 was an older guy. And for whatever reason, he like introduced me to Star Wars. Like I'm that old. And so like took me to the first Star Wars movie, but when it was re-released in 1980, right before Empire Strikes Back came out. So we went to both of those movies. Empire Strikes Back still freaked me out because I was like, I don't understand sequels. What do you mean Darth Vader's his father? This is terrible. But what I remember about him was I was 5, and occasionally I would get hurt. As 5-year-old kid, you fall down off your bike, whatever. And as 5-year-old kids, you typically cry. And I remember him saying to me on more than one occasion, you only get one small pouch of tears. And once you cry them all, they're gone.
Whoa.
And I knew that was BS, but it so took me out of like my feelings, like into like, wait, what are you inviting me to believe right now? I think there is, I think there is a machismo and a manliness concept that tears are weakness, and that sadness is weakness. I don't know if we'll end up talking about him or not, but I think about the commentator Jordan Peterson, and he's really concerned about men in this culture as well, and I want to say, so am I. Like, I don't do this to bash men. I actually want men to have fuller experiences. I want them to have relationships of depth. I want them to be able to show up for the people in their lives the way that they want to show up. And so, like, I think he wants that too, but he's sort of recapitulating some of the patriarchy and doing it. And one of the things I heard him say is that a son should be the strongest person at their father's funeral, because everyone else will be crumbling and they'll be looking for the new patriarch to like turn to and be comforted by, and they'll need to know that someone has it under control. And so just this idea that manliness is stoic, really the only emotion that men are allowed, it is anger, going back to the white male rage thing. And then interestingly enough, that's an emotion that we don't let other genders display. Like,
yeah,
we've cornered the market on it. We don't get any of the other ones, but we got that one and it's ours.
When you say that, one of the things that makes me think, and I had two thoughts. One, not being able to feel, and well, so first I'll think when you say it, when we talk about anger, I've always, so my background is as a clinical social worker, and I know that anger is actually a secondary emotion to hurt, pain, embarrassment, all of those emotions
Right.
being the first emotion. So like when men say like when men allow themselves to be angry but not other things, they're really just masking all of those other feelings. And just recently I was reading Bell Hooks' book, Man, Masculinity, and Love. And it's a fantastic book. And she talks about men through the lens of the patriarchy. And not to summate the whole book, but at least in part, she talked a lot about the sadness that lives within men not being able to experience that full range of emotions, and only be like how hard it must be to constantly feel like you have to be the rock. And I was actually watching a video, and I'm sure we'll get into it, and I'll shut up in a second. I was watching a video, and a man, it was about beta males and alpha males on YouTube. It was very wild. And this guy comes on and he's talking. He said, I want to be the rock for my family. He said, I want to be the rock that all the waves crash into. And like, for me, I was just sitting there. I was like, that's so sad. And somebody did say it to him. Luckily on this panel was a person who was also a social worker, and was like, that sounds like a lot of work.
Right.
Like a whole lot of work. And that's when you talk about that little pocket full of tears, like I can just imagine, like as a 5-year-old, you're thinking, what happens if I cry? So I can't cry when my knee hurt, when I fall down and I scrape my knee, because I need to cry at something bigger and I don't want to use all of mine up. The fact that it's a limited quantity of tears, like you have to save them for that's wild. It's wild.
Yeah. But no, I appreciate you naming that it's a secondary emotion, because you're absolutely right. It is. I am angry because something hurt me and made me feel sad, and so now I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen again, and I'm gonna lash out and push people away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I want to ask, before we get into the next topic, just ask, give you one more chance also to say anything else you want to recommend. I'm so sorry. My brain's a little bit fritzy today. It's been a long day. What other messages did you receive about what it means to be a white man in our society?
Right.
So you said when you were 5. Yeah, when you were 5, you had that message about tears. What have you been told by our society as you've been growing up as a white man? Like, what messages have you gotten about that, about how you're supposed to be in the world?
I really love that we've tied these white male rage together. I think it's important, because it that is distinct, and I think messages that I got about masculinity were explicitly like, this is, man up. Like that is a phrase we say to little boys, man up. My father died when I was 9. And I was looking through some papers recently and ran across a note that a friend of his sent me, a condolence card. And it was like, make sure you're a good boy and take care of your mom. And it's like, what kind of pressure are you putting on a 9-year-old kid to be sort of the man of the house? And what does that even mean? So there were lots of explicit messages of man up. Whiteness isn't talked about much by white people. So whiteness is like, what do you, I mean, I don't think I ever even had a conversation about whiteness with my dad. He died. I do remember my stepfather saying some stuff, who was very much both a very gracious, generous human being, and said some racist shit in front of me at times. And one of those was, my first child was born before my first wife and I were married. And he's like, so you're going to get married, right? I was like, I don't think so. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been making some bad decisions lately, and I don't think I should sign up for another decision until I know that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, I don't think it's respectable for kids to grow up in single parent homes. And I was like, I think you're living in a different generation. And he's like, well, not for white people.
Whoa. Wow. Like,
Yeah.
it's not often that white folks say the quiet part out loud, but that's interesting. And that,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And that he was concerned about respectability and what other people would think of you, not what was good for you or good for your kids or good for your wife or, good for your family, like what would be healthy for. It's like
I think he was concerned about the kid. I
Okay.
do think he was concerned about the kid.
But that word respectable is not referring to the
Right.
kid, right? That's referring to other people around. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not saying he's a bad person necessarily for that.
No, I don't hear that at all. So I actually, when I was thinking about being in this conversation, I very much wanted to presence both of my fathers early on in it. Both of them would double down on capitalism. My dad was an economist, loved Adam Smith, supply side economics. He was all for it. My stepfather also was we called him a slumlordicus for a while because he had so many different rental houses. So we disagreed on politics and theology and all kinds of things, but they always made space for me to do that. And in the last year, I've really come to this space where every time I am chopping garlic while I cook dinner, I think about Richard, my stepfather, because he taught me how to cook. And it's just like, Richard, this world's gotten a little crazier since you were here. What do you think? Because I think one of the parts about whiteness I don't know how to say this correctly, but why loneliness is so endemic in whiteness and why they go together is the emphasis on the individual.
Yep.
And so because I gave up my ethnic heritages to be white, I'm 2 generations away from being able to speak Croatian. Like I don't have any of that heritage really running through me. There is that disconnect from ancestors. And so, okay, Richard, whatever decisions you made to get here, you thought you were doing good. Tell me how you feel about it now. And so I think that I heard someone recently say, a friend of mine, he was asked on a different podcast as the last question, what legacy do you want to leave? And he's like, that my kids are proud of their father. And I think that's probably an overarching thing of masculinity that I think many different people can relate to. It's just this idea of wanting to create a life for my kids where they can thrive.
So I think about this too, in what you're saying, and wanting, and I have like a specific issue with legacy thought process, because I think sometimes when people think about leaving legacies, most of it comes around money, right? They'll be like, what is, and it also ties into, it's the capitalism. It ties into like wanting their name to go down in history. And that stands a lot with white men, right? Like there's so much of like, I want to reach this level where people know me. And that comes from like even white men who've been mass shooters and white men who've been presidents, white men who've made a lot of money, and they want people to know their name. And that's such and I think that stems through all of masculinity, but specifically with white men, it comes up so often. So I have this like issue with when I'm like, I don't know, when I'm dead, like people are going to talk about me in all kinds of ways. Hopefully it's for good reasons, and the people who are talking about me bad, hopefully it was because of something that I did that was good that they just didn't like. But this thought process of like having your children be proud of you is very different than trying to leave a legacy where you'll be known. And I think that's very different. But like, and I'm hoping that for most people, what their children are proud of is very, very different than what they are thinking about, especially when it comes to capitalism. Because often I would say when we talked about this, putting the subject together, one of the things that made me think of is that like people do really wild shit for capitalism. Like they will do really like things that they know are not good for other people just to have some sense of legacy and just to be known and have some sort of infamy or whatever. And how much they're robbed of like who they actually are because they're leaning into what they think they need to be to leave some sort of legacy. So I think about that as well. I think
that's a helpful lift up. Yeah, absolutely. Like, go ahead, Mel. You were about to say something.
I was going to change the subject a bit. So if you want to finish up that thought, yeah, I want to call my. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I suddenly, I mean, legacy can be sort of immortality,
right?
Like it's like what is my like? How do I become the big star? And what is my legacy? The statue that's left behind of me, and so so I appreciate that.
I think that capitalism facilitates a lot of narcissism, and we'll get into that in a moment, but narcissists fundamentally have a really insecure sense of self and ego. So, if you are fundamentally insecure, you need all these other people to validate you and put your name on buildings so you're remembered, and you're like that stems from a kind of a broken sense of internal. There's no solidity deep within yourself to know, yes, I am worthy, and yes, I will be remembered fondly. No, I have to purchase that fondness of memory, right? I have to flaunt my money around. I'm not saying that all charitable giving to like name a building after yourself is necessarily bad, but I do want to call myself out for something. And this is something Tyshell taught me in the many years working with her. And I caught it after I said it, but I just want to name it because I think it's a good educational moment for all of us. Earlier, when we were talking about Bentley's stepfather, saying that word about respectability, I rushed in to defend Bentley's stepfather, who I've never met, to say, oh, I'm sure he was a good person, right? This like obsession that white people have with defending that we are good people. Yeah. And Tyshell has taught me this. And I thank you for that, Tyshell, because I'm able to see it now, having worked with you for so long, that I don't need to defend Bentley's stepdad. I don't need to do that.
So let me kind of share with Bentley a little bit of where that thought process comes from. Mel and I did a class a while ago, and often what will happen is, and to be honest, Bentley did it too, but I know why people do it, and I'm not gonna scold our guest while he's here, but since you brought in that learning moment, is what will happen is white people feel the need to bring in somebody's goodness before they say something that person also did. And what the reason that it happens is because people are trying to say, well, they're still a really good person. It's because we think about, when it comes to racism, as a good, bad binary, right? You have to think about them as they're a good person, but they did this bad thing. But racism happens because we're all indoctrinated into this system of capitalism and patriarchy and all of these different things. So he was a person. He's fallible as a person. He did these things. And that's not just for men. It's for women. It's for theys, thems, and all in between, is that this person is fallible. I'm not always right. I'm not always good. And this person was a person. If you hear me talk about my mother, I will talk about her in the most plain of language, because she's both good, bad, and different. She's done good things, bad things, all of those things. but white people try to preserve that and say, well, they're a really good person, but they did this racist thing. But they're really, and it happens not necessarily, it's just this protective thing where whiteness has to be seen through this lens of, and we were taught not to talk about race. We were taught not to have those white people were taught not to have those conversations. For Black people, it happens, but it happens differently and it looks a little bit different. You wouldn't talk poorly about someone in front of a white person. Right.
Well, it's weaponized fragility, right? So like if we treat calling out racism as condemning someone's complete character and calling them evil, we're never allowed to really confront racism because that's such an extreme thing. So if we act like, to name racism for what it is means we're saying that person's like completely irredeemably bad, then we're much less prone to call it out. So so I just want to use that as a teaching moment. So I was like, oh yeah, this is we got to practice these things to unlearn these patterns, right?
Oh, somebody said,
well done, Mel.
Perhaps somebody said, Jill, I'm going to call her comment from Facebook. Perhaps because the bad thing might taint our belief about our relationship with that person. You're absolutely right. Because and more narcissism, she says. Yeah. One of those things, and I'm glad you said that, Jill, because I'll point to that thought process is that the undoing of understanding race and patriarchy and all of these things is to understand that this person is a full person. But often we see parental figures and people we love, we want to see them in a certain light. And if we think about the things that they did that were bad, then that person isn't as good as we thought they were, right? I'll give you an example from myself. I have a hard time thinking about Martin Luther King cheating on his wife, even though it's very well documented, right? And I have a hard time thinking about that because I know him to be that. But one of the things I try to really dig into in understanding that is that he's a full person, fallible in many different, and if we hold up people on a pedestal, we also can't see them as full, we can't see them as flawed, we also can't see ourselves being like them at all. So we see that. So then when we think about Martin Luther King, right? We think about him as very idealistic or idealized. So we think about him as holding him up here, and he must be, but he's a regular person, right? So thinking about them in their fullness, you can say, my father, he said racist things, not often, but he still said them, and they really caught me as well. So it's a part of it, and we have to look at people in a full way.
And I think when we
I appreciate.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, I appreciate you naming it, Taisha, and please continue to call me in.
Always, anytime.
I knew what I was doing, and I was choosing it more so that y'all didn't think I was just here to slam my stepfather.
Oh, sure.
My stepfather was my best man in my wedding, and he did some racist shit. So it's just they're both there.
He's the best man, and also I get it.
Well, there's cognitive dissonance there, right? Because if you recognize someone says racist things sometimes, if you really grapple with that, you at a point you have to recognize that maybe this is going to impact my relationship with them, or should it impact my relationship with them, or how does that impact the way I relate to them? So it calls us into account, into responsibility when we really take the time to name it, right? We need to, and like Cindy is saying, we need to be able to call things racist and call things out for being racist without completely condemning the human being and throwing them in the garbage. But that's really hard to do in this day and age when everything's really polarized and extreme and things like that. But
I think too when we talk about and out to Cindy's comment, and I want to get back into because we're having these. I love when people are engaging. I love it. Being called a racist, and I try not to do it as much anymore because it's been weaponized in the way the behavior is racist. And if every white person, it's kind of like, I actually try. So I'll give an example. I try not to call myself an ally anymore. I try to have allied behavior, but the title doesn't belong to me. And I can't just wear it around. And I think white people have taken racist and will say things like, being called a racist is like being called the N-word. And I'm like, Girl, it's not.
No.
It's real not. And it's the same thing. What has happened through racism, and I want to get back to capitalism and loneliness as well, is that we bastardized the language, so now anybody can't use it. If you just saw like Ron DeSantis's like a speech for running for president, he said woke like 40 times or something, but it means everything and then means nothing. So behaviors are racist. Being called a racist doesn't characterize you as this thing all the time, which is why Ibram X. Kendi came up with the term anti-racist, because you don't have to stop having racist behavior to be anti-racist. You're only you can't even say, you can't call yourself an anti-racist. You're not supposed to anyway. You're supposed to have anti-racist behaviors. So you can have a racist behavior and a not racist behavior. Nazis had children and they loved them, but they also had very racist behavior. So there's a lot of duality in how people are. And it's a very big scarcity model, right? Like getting back into the topic, when we're talking about this loneliness. And one thing that you said, Bentley, really called me to think about this from the standpoint of loneliness and understanding yourself, right? Like the reason that loneliness exists so much in individualism in the white community is because of the loss of the sense of identity. Because when you become white, you have to give up something, and that is identity, right? You have to give up this connection to be white. And we try to I think we had this conversation in season 1 where we talk about the term where white even comes from in miscegenation and after Bacon's Rebellion, having to call these group of European immigrants white to make a law that other people can't have something, right? So the title itself of white means just that. And I think it's one of those things that white becomes universal to everything. And I was just having this conversation about beauty with somebody. It's like when white is the center of everything, it doesn't have to be spoken, as you said. There's no reason to talk about, like, that's what white people know. Like, you don't, to be a good white person, you just don't mention race. And it's like, but it's there. And it's like the same thing. When you got money, you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But poor people talk about money all the time. Right. So that's that same thing. So I just was thinking about that and this disconnect of understanding your own identity and having to pull individualism and not, which is really interesting to me as a Black person, because we have individualism, but we have collectivism, like our community. Like I see myself, and like to the point where when I see a Black person, I'm like, hey girl, I literally at work, at my job, just reached out to a bunch of the Black women at work because I'm on my entire team of, I think maybe 100, one of 2. So I'm like, where are the other Black people that work at this company? And I started just reaching out, like cold calling, like, hey, want to make a cultural connection, because to me, that's how you're supposed to do it. But I know that other people don't necessarily do that, and especially do it on the basis of also being like a white person, like, which would seem kind of silly, I guess anyway.
It wouldn't be exactly cool to just be like, hey, they're white, I'm going to go talk to them because they're also white and I'm also
but it just has a completely different connotation, right?
Does.
Like,
it just means something different. Yeah, it just does.
Right.
So let's get back to the topic. I really want to make sure we've got enough time for this. So I'm sorry, that came across like a chastisement. I'm a little off my game tonight. I don't know if you can tell. And last time I was talking about like weird like turkeys and stuff. Anyway,
that was so funny. That was very funny. Anyway.
All right. Okay. So I want to give a brief history lesson. May I take a few minutes and just
please do
throw some, because I'm a history nerd and I love this stuff. And if either of you have anything to add to this, please feel free to jump in. Okay. So I want to go back to ancient Greece, because a lot of our modern conceptions in Western thought, especially when it comes to white people and white men, come from ancient Greece, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. And it seems like a really long time ago. However, we've got to remember that all of those ideas were like introduced into European thought in the Renaissance. So it's actually not that long ago. And that directly influenced Adam Smith, the father of modern capitalism, who laid the groundwork for how we understand property ownership and what that means in these and civility and work ethic and all of these sort of modern conceptions of capitalism. There's a direct through line from ancient Greece to Adam Smith to now to now today. So I just want to kind of draw this little very nerdy line. Ancient Greeks had a really interesting conception of gender. They believed that men were, in a sense, closer to the gods and more inherently fit to rule everybody else. So that's why citizenship in ancient Greece was only granted to men who could vote, because women were seen as being closer to the earth and therefore closer to the emotions, their emotions. So the conception of men that we have for thousands of years in Western thought and European thought is that men are supposed to be impassive and emotionless so that they can be fit to rule. And actually, there are some quotes from some of these ancient philosophers that said, like, women are men that didn't get fully formed in the womb. So women are like defective men. And they're not good, so that's why in like ancient Greece, like women were not educated because they're like, oh, well, they weren't completely fully cooked in the womb. So therefore, like we cannot educate a woman mind. They must rule the domestic world. So it's really rare, except if women were really, really high class, they could get educated in ancient Greece. But that meant that what in Greek society, it meant that almost like women, if they reached a certain wealth stratification, they could supersede their gender and almost be considered an honorary man and earn the privileges to become educated.
Are you talking about modern white feminism? Oh, okay.
I know.
About ancient Greece.
Right. So these ideas are still familiar. They're still familiar. Okay. So you take this idea that like men are the only ones who are fit to rule, but not just men. We're talking about men who have been granted citizenship. So generally property owning males, right? So when you fast forward through the Renaissance and through to like the late 18th century, so we're talking like 1750 to 1800, that's when the United States was being founded, and all of these ideas from the Enlightenment have kind of fomented into establishing the United States, which granted citizenship to property owning men. And just like they modeled our government after ancient Greece in so many ways, right? We also have Adam Smith writing his book, Wealth of Nations. His work came out almost at the exact same time as the United States was founded. And I want to run through some of Adam Smith's concepts, his ideas. This stuff sounds very boring on the surface, but like it'll feel familiar from a lot of the things that we've even discussed in this conversation. Okay. So Adam Smith believed that human beings are selfish, egotistic, exclusively concerned with self-love, and that we have an unquenchable desire for the most extravagant forms of material wealth. Does that sound familiar?
Wow. I mean, it's funny because when you say it, I think yes, but then I also think, oh, well, they wasn't talking about me because I wasn't even a full person. Like I was 3/5 a human, and so like to me it feels familiar. Yet like, oh, he wasn't even talking to me. I'm a woman,
he was talking about gentried men. So these concepts that he was writing about, that he was speaking about, the ideas that he was formulating were really instrumental in forming the modern concept of a white man that we have today, because that's who this was written to and for and about. He was really preoccupied with civilization versus, and excuse me for this word is offensive to some communities, but this is the historical term that he used, the word savage. What is separates the civilized communities from the uncivilized communities was, for him, property ownership versus lawlessness. So he believed that, and this is a direct quote, the first and chief design of every system of government is to maintain justice, to prevent the members of society from encroaching on one another's property or seizing on what is not their own.
It just made me think of the suburbs. Like,
yes.
The thing that came up in my brain was property lines in the suburbs.
Yes.
Manicuring your lawn, redlining and not letting people of color in. It was like they were actually, let's just write Adams. Like, wow.
If you would make like a math equation from like your high school geometry, you do those like math proofs. Like if you take like property ownership equals civility equals self-interest equals man.
Right.
It's a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1. And then when you add on top of it that he believed that human nature equals self-interest, which means he believed that human nature means seeking wealth through labor. and that any civilization that he came across, like Chinese, Arab, anybody around the world, that was more communitarian and not individualistic, like communities that shared and didn't like fight over property, Native American communities, any communities he saw that weren't like exhibiting self-interest, he was like, oh, they're not civilized. They can't possibly succeed as a society. So Bentley, I know you have a lot of you said your dad was an economist. I know you're really interested in this stuff, and I know that you know some about this. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about these topics.
Have you ever read or run across the book Who Made Adam Smith's Dinner?
No.
So the thing about Adam Smith is well into his, like, older than I am now. So old man. He was still living with his mama, who made his dinner every night. And so he's writing about how selfish everybody is and how the invisible hand of economy works, that, like, you know, if I go to the butcher, he's going to sell me good meat, because if he doesn't sell me good meat, then I won't go to him again, and then he won't be able to feed his family. That his self-interest and my self-interest actually benefit one another. All the time skipping over and invisibilizing the labor of women.
Yes.
Specifically his own mother, who was sacrificial, loving, nurturing, all these other things that were completely the opposite of what he was saying. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix of just
it's giving loneliness. It's giving like the fact that she talked about him, and then you said, "Oh, he lived with his mother his whole life," was like.
And it's no surprise that to this day, domestic labor is considered having no capitalistic value, right? It's not compensated. It's not talked about. It's not valued on someone's resume. It's even though if you add up all the things that women do behind the scenes domestically in the domestic sphere, it adds up to well into six figures, all of the quote monetary value that could be placed on that if you were to hire out all of those positions. But it's just like, oh, she's just a stay-at-home mom, right? So like this sense of rulership and what is considered valuable in our society is aligned with what white men have traditionally done and not what any other people group have done.
Also, one thing you said that really struck me too, or I was thinking about, maybe I'm wrong, but just the top of my head was like, even the Greek gods aren't like the male gods are like thunder, and the women are like the goddess of this and like all earthly things, and then all the gods are like concepts and lightning and above the earth. So just even that thought process, and it's really interesting to me, because when you talk about Adam Smith and then you bring in him living with his mother, it is like capitalism and then loneliness and then all of these things and being constantly probably masking his loneliness and sadness with anger or what have you. And then also the thought process of what is who is not civilized and civil. This is in the direct parallel. This, like that line that's so parallel that you talked about too, comes into even how we are now, because one of the things that you'll hear a lot of white people talk about when they talk about our political system, and this is not saying one or the other, is how uncivil it is. They constantly talk about we're more divided now than we've ever been. And I'm like, no, you just have to see how divided it is now, because people have, like, I remember a young white liberal student of mine, the day after Trump won, he was distraught. And I remember saying to him, oh, now you're just aware of how it is for other people. Like, that was a lot. I had a lot of those conversations with young white liberals, and like, oh, it's been like this. So when people talk about this fragment, I mean, we're seeing more terrible behaviors, but like people say, oh, we just need to get back to civil. We just need to get back to civil. We just need to get back to civil. And I'm like, but for who? And for how? And what does that mean?
Who defines that?
Right. And this thought process. And it's not because I think that It's because some white people are showing the behaviors that have been internal, and you couldn't say, as people now say, call it the quiet part out loud, and the quiet part is just being said out loud. And it's not that they want the behavior to change, they just want people to stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Because that when they say be more civil, that's what really lives in there. It's not the we need to change society. We need to get better. We just need to stop talking about it because it's not civil.
Or we need to get back to the false peace that we had before we started talking about this, because you're making me uncomfy.
Right. Uncomfortable.
Yeah. And to also remember that historically, like, people of color and women have been literally locked out of property ownership. If that is like the de facto, like, right to rule society, right to be in charge, like that the exclusion in that, and the selfishness in that of intentionally excluding people from financial systems, from housing markets, from economic systems, from education systems, the intentional design of that by primarily white men and white women later on, but definitely white women have absolutely contributed to this as well. I would love to get your thoughts, Bentley, on the link in all of this with loneliness for white men. What is your perspective on that? Like, do you see this among a lot of white men? And
is it even a conversation?
Is it a conversation? And are we exaggerating that idea here?
No, I mean, perhaps we are starting to wake up to just how traumatic capitalism is for all of us.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
A great thought, Paul. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
For all of us.
For all of us. All of us.
And all of us differently. I mean, I think it impacts us differently, but it is trauma. I think. Oh gosh, I'm thinking of so many thoughts at once, and I apologize. I think when we talk about capitalism, we have to talk about the fact that we are all forced at this point to be participating in this system called capitalism. There is no way to opt out of it,
right?
In this current capitalist hellscape that we're in. And I'm not a capital. I mean, in the truest sense of, like, it's not like I'm owning this huge capital that I'm like venture capitalism. Like, that's such a small percentage of the globe that is benefiting from capitalism.
Right.
I actually, when in thinking about this conversation, I started thinking about how white males, the majority of white males, so that's a small population, but the majority of them actually don't benefit from capitalism.
Oh yeah, no,
true,
not at all.
But they'll defend it to the teeth
because it's the myth.
Because they're the soldiers.
Right.
We got conscripted into being the soldiers for capitalism.
Sold the myth.
And sold the myth. And, I mean, I think back to the church I pastored. It was a lot of Vietnam vets. And they had to live with the pain of coming home from Vietnam and being called baby killers.
Oh God.
And still sort of live with this, do I love my country? Do I not love my country? What was I a patriot? Was I not a patriot? And just the moral injury that was involved in all of that. Most of them doubled down and still were like very USA.
Right.
And I think most white males double down and say, yay, capitalism. Like, it's the same sort of soldier mentality. I think what you're seeing in this generation, much like the soldiers that went off to 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq, questioning the military industrial complex more. You're seeing millennials and Gen Zs who can't buy a house. And so white guys are like, wait, I was promised property, but it's not there. And so you're getting this phenomenon of what Michael Kimmel called aggrieved entitlement. angry white men who believe they were entitled to something, much like a veteran in a war believes they were entitled to a GI Bill or something else. So like this metaphor of that white men have been conscripted into the war of capitalism is kind of where I've been living.
And if property ownership equates with, in our Western thinking, the right to rule and the right to access masculinity, then being denied property ownership is like an egotistical blow in that sense, right? Like
it's a humiliation.
Yeah.
It's an emasculation, it's a humiliation, and all that's left is rage.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's funny, not funny. Go ahead, Mel.
Can I just read this quote really quick? I want to pop it up on the screen. John Steinbeck said, "Socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires."
Right.
Temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And I think that's probably specifically related to men who are put in a position of being considered the primary breadwinner, especially in Steinbeck's day. So poor men seeing themselves not as exploited laborers who are being taken advantage of by wealthy labor barons who are, just paying them pennies for their labor, but they see themselves as like, they're meant to be the lords. They're meant to be the millionaires ruling other people. And they're just having a temporary setback for them. So it's embarrassment.
When we think about it too, that's also the origin of racism, right? At least in part, is that
Bacon's rebellion.
Don't be mad at the white man with all the money. Be mad at the poor brown person who's taking your job. So because that's the reason you can't become the white man with all the money. When clearly when you look at a pyramid and there's a top 1% and the rest is at the bottom, it's this, scraping to get to the top, and then this willingness to cut other people out and put other people down to be up there. And I think it's really, really interesting in how it happens. And we could probably do an entire episode with this lens to white women, and was because when we talk about feminism and second, third, first, whatever wave feminism, when white women taking in the place of white men to become that capitalistic person. So when you look at affirmative action and how it's benefited white women, they had to take on the characteristics of white men to be in that place. And what it does to all of our society, what it does to all of us in general, which is like when people hear that I work in, like I always tell people I'm not a corporate ladder climber. Like I don't really care as much about a title, but like we still all of us are a part of that because we think about our achievements through the lens of making more money and like monetizing and all of these things. And I just think about when you, one of the things you talked about, Mel, was the loneliness in that, because some of the loneliest people tend, and I'm not out here to say like, give rich people a break. No, give them a break. Don't give them a break on anything, especially not their taxes. But the loneliness that comes from trying but doing it individually. And that's the thing. This is the other thing that individualism gives people is this space between other people to say that I have it better than you or I am different than you, and not to have a conversation to lean on that other person when you need somebody to hold space for you. So then you realize, oh, if we band together, then we're stronger as like we have that. And I'm not saying that all, and I will say I would say venture to say it's a little bit worse now that we all have this, like, I think social media is great. I think internet is great, but it has also infiltrated the Black and brown communities, because now the connection to seeing what wealth looks like so easily is right there. So our community becomes less insular and important to us for some. And in some ways, so we try to make sure we have that, but like it takes a village is a thing that comes up in Black communities all the time, like to raise a child, to be this person. Like if we relied on each other, we wouldn't. I'll give an example of like some of the worst capitalism that's so sad. Whenever somebody at your job gets sick, so say Joan has a rare or Matt has a rare disease and needs to be out of work, they will ask other employees to give up their sick days to
What?
donate their people. Yeah,
Yes.
Mel doesn't
That's
work
a thing?
Yeah,
Yes,
they'll be like,
it's a
can you
thing.
donate your sick days to Matt as he
Oh.
goes through bone marrow transplants or whatever, instead of the job just giving him those days.
Ew, that's so
You
gross.
I've now donated, and again, what it's tries to make people feel like is that we're all there for each other. You
We're in
are
it
a
together.
company
Yeah.
where you could
Yeah.
just give him the time.
Yeah.
But no,
Right.
and that's the thing. They want us to believe this false thought process that we're there for them when the company could just do more. And we can see that in all of what we're seeing now and how these record breaking profits that companies are having when we're out here living through inflation. Like it's just ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
oh my
That's
gosh.
the same thing of like when you go to a checkout at a grocery store and they're like, would you like to donate $1 to such and such cause? Those are corporate tax breaks. Like they're using that as a tax shelter. They're not, and not a, my understanding is that a big percentage of that money never gets to its final destination.
No, yeah, you can, and you should ask.
Yeah.
So in most, and I wouldn't say don't yell at the hey folks, don't yell at the cashier and be like, you don't give that money to them, blah, 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 blah. But what you should ask is do you know how much of that money, because some companies will now tell you, do you know how much of that money goes to the charity? Because if it's not over 80%, or I would say 70 to 80%, because yes, like when you donate to an institution, you have to pay the people who are running the operation. But if only 5 or 10% of your dollar is going to them, no, you can give it directly to. I prefer not to donate clothes to like I'm not going to say any big institutions, but to these different places that take in clothes. I prefer to give it directly to a church that can distribute it to those people and not have to go through a corporation where somebody is buying my shirt that I donated for $10 and then no, exactly.
Or you can walk outside that supermarket and there's probably someone that's panhandling and just like doesn't have enough to like where to go to eat that night. So like
exactly,
you can just give it directly to the person and have them buy what they want and need.
There you go.
Exactly.
So white male rage, I'd like to touch on this more before we wrap up. White male rage. I mean, we've talked about all these pieces that contribute: embarrassment, isolation. To me, it seems like the white male vitriol, and women going along with it, honestly, but the white male vitriol that we see in our country right now far outpaces the inputs that we've discussed today. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's so much more inflated than like what embarrassment and loneliness should cause for rage. You know what I mean? So there's a gap there that I think is being driven by sensationalist media and like wealthy, people taking advantage of that polarization and that fear mongering. But I wonder, Bentley, if you have thoughts. I mean, as a white man, like this is your demographic. Like, if you have thoughts, I mean, I'm not asking you to explain or excuse this, but just like if you can help us maybe understand, like why is my white male rage just so potent these days?
And how do you engage it with your children to make sure that you, as you say, like you like them as people and you're loving who they become? And how do you teach them that like this is some things that we have to really think about and talk about, if you have at all?
Oh yeah, no, we talk about it. So why is it becoming so big? Is that kind of what you're asking? Like, why is it out? You feel like it's out proportioned is what I'm kind of hearing.
From what I've seen, yeah.
And the whole, let's go back to the Tiki Torchy people in Virginia. You will not replace us, folks.
Yeah.
And replacement theory. If you think your whole identity is in what you can produce, and wages have stagnated for 30 years, if you think your whole right as a citizen is property ownership, but you can't buy into that, if you think all of these things and you don't have anyone that you can reach out to, because that would be vulnerable and that would be weak. You can't actually have real community. You have transactional relationships everywhere. Because mutuality requires vulnerability, and that's intimacy that like would be weak. So if you don't have any access to any of that, it would be very easy to believe that your race is about to be extinguished. Like it is fighting. They think they're on the ropes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and in some ways they're not entirely wrong, but they're wrong not in the way they think they are.
Right.
Like it is a Cro-Magnon way of being in the world that doesn't really fit the 21st century.
Right.
And so it's so yeah, people are going to have to, as institutions continue to crumble, people are going to have to get involved in mutual aid and start caring about their neighbor. And I mean, it's just going to look different.
We have a couple of important questions from listeners that comments I want to show. This one is from Cindy. White men account for 70% of suicides. Rage turned inward because of the way success is defined, probably largely.
One of the things I would say, and I've been saying this to people because people always talk about success, and I always say, and one of the things that I've said, and I think about writing this down all the time, but I'll say it here, is that success is what people think is capitalism conflated with happiness. Right. So people think success, this is what success is. And success to people is happiness, but under the guise of what capitalism is. Right. And I think about that for suicide, and especially, men who die by suicide often die in very violent ways by suicide as well. And it's this thought process when we talk about like, why is it that? And Bentley, you talk about seeing yourself through the guise of being able to like own and make and produce. Of course, if I can't do that, or somebody else is going to take that away from me, then I feel like I don't have a place at all.
I don't have a right to exist.
Right. That's the only thing I have. And the other thing that we have to really pay attention to with politicians, any of them, all of them, is they're yelling at white men in a very different way than they're used to. They're telling them to go back and stake their claim and take this back and all of those things, because they're trying to rally that you should have ownership. But they're not talking about real ownership in the way that in ownership in property and money in the way that they're going to make sure you have it. They're going to tell you to take it from other people. And they're telling you that because when we think about the long arc of justice, right? When we think about what justice means, when it bends towards that, and it's not because it bends, it's because we bent it, we bend it, right? 2020, it has to now be bent back, right? So they're telling you, they're yelling at you and telling you that you need to take your place back, and we're going to stop this, we're going to stop woke, we're going to stop this, we're going to stop that, because they don't want you, because our education system started letting us be educated about things. You can see this Ron DeSantis is like perfect storm of this. You can see it taking it out, taking DEI out. And then you can see wedge issues like putting Asian studies in, but not like the Chinese Exclusion Act and learning about those things, but learning about the model minority, learning about what would equate to the model minority myth, because they still need a cudgel. They still need somebody in there. So what they're doing is making you believe like you need to stop this, because this is why you can't be rich. This is why you can't have money. And it still lands on the fact that you can't be, and as Jill talked about, being vulnerable. So you can express anger, but you can't express any vulnerability. Right? Yeah. Would men rather feel? And I don't think that men even think about. And this is and Bentley, you can tell me if I'm wrong. From a psychological perspective, it's not about even being afraid to be vulnerable. It's not even thinking about your vulnerability at all.
No,
you're not even, if you never think about being vulnerable. And the only time men ever think about, and this goes back to the book I was reading with Bell Hooks, who wrote this book years ago, is the only time that men think about being vulnerable is during sex. And then then there becomes illicit sexual behaviors as well, right? Yeah. Not all, but some, because that's the only time you're allowed to be vulnerable at all in any sort of space where you can feel. And then that becomes the only way that you feel is through that, and not with a circle of other people, men and women and children and anyone, and they have to go to this one thing. So this is where the alcohol, the drugs, those kinds of things come up as well.
This is also why I think so many men are so into sports, is because it's like the one and only place they can express a range of emotions. Besides, they can cry, they can hug each other, they can experience intimacy. It's emotional catharsis. Like it's like putting it onto something else, right? But I mean, it makes sense. It makes total sense.
So apparently you can't even cry at your own father's funeral.
No, apparently
you can't cry at that, but you can cry when the Bills win over the Bucks. I don't know who these people are. I'm just naming sports teams.
If experiencing emotions and being vulnerable, like, essentially emasculates you in your conception of what it means to be a human, and that's like your biggest fear. And emasculation means you don't have a right to own property or to show leadership or be a citizen. Like, of course, the stakes feel super high if you're going to exhibit any, quote, weak feminine traits, because it means like your whole existence can no longer be justified. That's insanely traumatic.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and I want to also point to, and as the person on this podcast that is a person of color, that is a Black person, this is also not us having this conversation to let white men off the hook, because what we're saying and what we're wanting to do here is educate them, really leaning into and making space for. I mean, I want to make space for men as people, Black men, white men, Asian men, all men, right? All. But white men have a particular place that they can start to really think about and learn from this, because it's not just killing, like racism, capitalism, patriarchy is not just killing women. It's killing us at a higher rate. It's killing Black people more visibly, but it's also killing white men.
Yeah.
The highest rates of suicide. Somebody said, I was watching something, somebody said, women have the higher rates of depression. And the person's rebuttal to that was, yes, because men don't go get diagnosed. Not because they don't have depression and anxiety. It's because they refuse to go get diagnosed. So when you hear men say, oh, I'm not going to therapy, you're like,
why would you deny yourself something you need? But to recognize that you need it is seen as weakness. Yeah.
And it's the same thing when we think about, and I know we didn't want to spend too much of the episode, and we haven't, on thinking about mass shooters, these cries for loneliness, this cries for hate and rage often. And I just learned a few years ago that Columbine had like very racist undertones to it that we just weren't even talking about at the time that it happened. But like,
interesting.
Most, I think 90% of
it happened on Hitler's birthday.
Oh my God.
And they were looking for kids of color in the hallways.
Oh my God.
I didn't. They had. Yeah. I just.
Nobody talks about that,
right? Because at the time we weren't really talking about race, like when white people weren't, and was it public. But then also when we think about serial killers, when we think about mass shooters, like they tend to be white men, and if we're not finding really good outlets for community, vulnerability, all of the things, identity, then they can come. And I'm not saying that every person will become these things. That's not it at all. But we have to find outlets and really find those people really with each other, white men finding groups with each other, and not just playing golf where you just don't talk about your emotions and you talk about par fours or whatever, to be able to have conversation and be a person. And it's funny because when I was reading the book by Bell Hooks, that's like what I came away with, even though I was like, I started reading this book like, ugh, men are trash. But then I was like, oh no, I should create a space for them. But I'm not going to create a space for them to the detriment of myself. And that's
absolutely
not a Black man, a white man, any man, to the detriment of myself, because women are often asked to do that.
And that's what patriarchy and capitalism does. It like makes us fight for this perceived, like, well, if I'm bigger, then you have to be smaller, instead of we can both be the right size and we can both share and we can both exist. And So Bentley, what for you is the antidote to this stuff? Like, what for you is the healing balm for the things that we've been talking about today? What advice do you have for us.
And how do you stay in touch with what that looks like for you, for sons, or all of those things?
Yeah.
I would actually echo what you were just saying, Tyshell. It's being in relationship, authentic relationship with other men. I mean, I think for most straight white men, the only place that they have any type of vulnerable relationship is with their intimate partner, usually during sex. But then they rely on that partner to do all their emotional labor.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yes.
And so, like, that's why they don't know what to do with the weakness of vulnerability. And so to be around men actually talking about real things. And yes, oftentimes it means doing sports together, sports ball, and, you know, or whatever, hunting, fishing, whatever it is they do. But like, but being real together, looking each other in the eye and saying, this is what's hurting me today. This is what's, you know, this is what's getting me down. This is where my joy is. I think we also should be talking about joy more. So it's being in real relationships are the antidote.
How do men do that if they've built these walls up for so many years and it feels threatening to, like, what do you recommend for men to start developing those relationships?
There's a few things. I mean, I would say if you can't find a person, definitely get a counselor or therapist. Like, try practicing vulnerability with somebody. And if you have to pay them to do it, you know, then like, let's do it that way first. I have found over and over again that if I just name something to some guys are relieved to talk about stuff that they haven't talked about in years. They're just like, oh, okay, we can breathe here. We don't have to pretend that I have it all together.
That's heartbreaking. That, like, that's so sad, and also so beautiful, but also so sad.
So I think it is risking. Just, I mean, and what did you lose? Like, you know, like, okay, so that person thinks you're weird. They've walked away, and you don't have to spend any more time with them. That's great.
Exactly. I think too. So one of the things that I'll add to what you're saying, because I am a big proponent of therapy, and this is a mind shift that Dr. Raquel Martin said when I heard her on Amanda Seals' podcast. She said, we have to stop thinking about therapy as I have to go to therapy, and more as I get to go to therapy, because you get to spend a time on yourself and really investigate. I just encourage men to say something that you're feeling when you're in the company of your friends, other men, that you may not have said. You can say, that made me uncomfortable, that made me whatever, because they may go, oh, it wasn't just me, right? That kind of thing. And I'll say, from my experience from Black men, there was a campaign online a few years ago called #BlackMaleJoy or Black Boy Joy. And there was like recently on TikTok where they were like, we're outside. There was a guy who decided to frolic in the grass. And then there was like an entire campaign of like people go, oh, we out here frolicking and shit. And they were just like frolicking through the grass. Like, ask somebody, like, just do that really weird thing that you think that will make you all laugh. Like, be like, I saw somebody recently ask their older parents, do you remember how to skip? And like, just skip, or like, because the release of being able to, and it's like, oh, I don't feel like a man when I do this. It happens in women's communities as well, where it happens a lot with mothers, where they are not telling people how hard it is for them. And that just builds so much community when you can do that. And I would say, just say how you're feeling when you're in the presence of your friends, and not in a wrapped up into a certain kind of way. You could be like, that was really scary. Like, I applaud my husband, because he doesn't, neither one of us like horror movies. And like, he'd be like, oh, I can't listen to that. And like, we really talk about those things. And, you know, people always say, like, she's emasculating. And I'm like, am I though? Like, he's still an entirely whole person. So I just be in a company, as Bentley says, be in a company of other men and just say how you feel one day and go seek therapy. Therapy's so good.
Therapy's great.
And find you a male therapist who can hold space for you, because that's
find you a
important
male
as well.
therapist. Find a male therapist that can hold your anger so that it doesn't become rage. Because that's part of what rage means, is it's out of control anger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like we don't know how to sit with it. So it's just got to be discharged. And so learning how to sit with it and realize, oh, no one has to die for this anger. I can feel it and it can wash over me and we can move forward and perhaps even into greater intimacy.
Right.
You have to have these body sensorium experiences or you don't know how to do it out in everyday life.
And not just to experience that anger, but to excavate it and understand where it's coming from and why.
Right.
And be brave enough to go, talk about holding brave space, be brave enough to go beneath the anger and say, what's under there that's driving this?
Right.
You know, it strikes me too, Bentley, that what you're recommending to men is to like, basically be the first one to go out on a limb and like, be the first one to say, I'm sad or I'm feeling this kind of way. Yeah. I'm thinking about the irony of that actually makes you an ultimate provider, because you are providing yourself and them the permission to be a real, full human being. You are providing permission. You are offering a gift to that person and to you to be real and to have human connection and intimacy, which we all need to be healthy. We need connection to each other and we need connection to the earth.
And that's what Ted Lasso was. I don't know if you got to show the show, but I mean, like, he in the midst of sports ball, he introduced this idea of a detoxified masculinity, and by the end of it, they were all doing life differently.
Yes.
And so it is, and so like I've even talked to guys about that. Did you see the show? What did you like about it? I wonder what it would be like to be around people like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would say my other advice to add to that is just hold space for one another, create spaces. That's another thing, that if you don't have a space, create a space. And it doesn't make you any. I don't define man by like what makes you more of and less of, because we're all people. I really hold the we're all people, and what makes someone. The most masculine person I ever met was a ear, nose, and throat female doctor. She was amazing. I was like, she's got such masculine energy. I very much love this. So invite yourself to be a full human being and experience a range of emotions, because we all are people, and we have to really. And I know we spent time really talking about white men in this. Then it's not my favorite topic, but I think too we have to create space for all people. And like honestly, the reason that I think the reason, and I'll say it for myself, that I thought this topic was important to bring is because white men still hold the key to all of our part of our liberation as well. And the sooner they learn about their own full selves. I was just talking to my husband the other day about the epigenetics of like why white people came from Europe and different places in Europe to this country, and how they are repeating that same kind of behavior. They were exiled religiously and stood in a town square and flogged and all of those things, and then they repeated that through slavery, right, with other people. But now they're giving in and not
outsourcing their trauma.
Right. So like the more if we all of our our liberation is all connected to each other's.
Yes, it is.
Right.
And to me, I'm not letting white men, white women, Black people, anyone off the hook for that. And if you can listen, I want to help a white man so he can help himself, so he can get his foot off my neck as well, because all of our liberation is tied to each other. And the more we can be people together, and happier in that time, because the time that we have here on this earth is so finite and so small. And that's the legacy, like being a human, leaving behind that human legacy. And I always say this, I share this with a lot of people, and I'll share it with you all so you can take it back to your spaces, is that my motto for who I am as a person is I am both an ancestor and a descendant. Right. That's my personal motto. I live in the footpath of the people who made it through so much for me to be here, and I also am creating a footpath that I hope is easier for the people who come behind me. And I feel my ancestors. Listen, I feel my ancestors when I'm seasoning a piece of chicken, because that's just how we do. But like, I am an ancestor and a descendant. Like, I stand here and I can be here because someone made it through from my journey, a very horrible experience, but they had the strength to be here. And I want to make it easier so that people can thrive and not just survive. And I want other people to have that experience with and for and around me as well. So hopefully white people can start to do that for themselves, live through, talk to, engage with your ancestors, the good and the bad, and start to really live as a full human being and not seeing your existence through a dollar sign, because it's all made up in the end on this ball of sentient dust or whatever.
And how dehumanizing to just think about ourselves in terms of dollar signs. That's not fair to us. That's not fair to anybody. It's not worthy of us. Yeah.
This has been a great conversation with you, and I'm sure I could do.
Good.
I know we've had, thank you for all the audience folks who've quoted, and we've gotten so much of what you've said. This has been a great conversation. Bentley, thank you for bringing your presence here to have this conversation with us. So we'll end just with what's top of mind for you all. And Mel, you want to start? What's top of mind for you?
Top of mind is hope. This conversation gives me hope. Shows like Ted Lasso give me hope. Men like Bentley give me hope. Like I just, we don't have to live this way. We can do it different. There are different ways of existing, and we can learn and we can change and we can grow. And it's not dire if we are willing to evolve. And our communities are willing to evolve. And it's just a really good reminder that we need each other. We need each other to be healthy. And hope. This is what I feel top of mind at this moment.
Awesome. Bentley, what is top of mind for you?
I mentioned my younger son just turned 20, so I'll end with my older son's finishing up his AA right now. And he'll be moving on to study mechanical engineering. And that's all wonderful. He's big brain on that kid. Go ahead. And he lives in Oregon, and I live in Florida, and I haven't seen him in a year, and I'm sad. I miss my little boy. That's like not a little boy anymore. But he is so going back to like just raising different types of men. When I get him on the phone, like we'll play phone tag for a while, but when I get him on the phone, he'll be on the phone for an hour asking all these like really involved, emotional, available type questions. And so he's a good man, and I miss him, and he's doing good things in the world. So
awesome. I hope you get to talk to him and see him soon. Come over out here to the Pacific Northwest, and I don't know. I don't know what people do in Oregon, but do whatever people do in Oregon with your son.
White people things like hike.
Exactly. And drink coffee and wear socks and sandals. I get it. I know. I get it. So, and I'll say what's top of mind for me is kind of that taking a vacation. I haven't taken one in a very long time. And I think just having some sort of respite. So I'm planning a family vacation, just some time away. I moved from East Coast to West Coast, and I think I took 3 days of a 12-day trip off. I worked from the car in a hot spot, and I was like on that capitalistic train, and I haven't even gone on. I got married 3 years ago and haven't gone on the honeymoon. So all of those things. I haven't. So, and I just saw my mom was on a podcast talking about traveling, and I love, and it made me want to go. Okay, I don't love flying, but I just need to go. Like, my mom went on a cruise with her sister. Then 3 weeks later, she went to the Bahamas. I think she's going somewhere else.
Good for her.
I love it. I love it for her. I love it. So I just want to take some time away. So I'm going to take some. I think I'm going to go to the Oregon coast, depending on the weather, in the next couple of weeks, and then venture to
Nice.
California because I'm on the West Coast. So you got to go to California if you live on the West Coast. So
That's
just
right.
just take time for yourself, right?
Yes.
You know, and in whatever way that you can, whether it's a staycation, a vacation, a walk in the park, really, and I'll use Bentley's word, like really finding the daily joy. And I always tell that, but when I was doing therapy, I would always say I was doing college therapy in colleges, I would tell people, like, you deserve joy in every single day where you can find it. And joy has nothing to do with money. But if it's like buying a coffee or making a coffee, get some sunshine on your face. The vitamin D is important. Put on sunscreen when you do it. But really just go and take some time to not be working, to not have an output, to really sit and recharge. So that's what's top of mind for me. I just want to thank you all for this, and Bentley especially, for this conversation. This has been great.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bentley.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Tyshell. Like, I know it's probably not easy to be the only person of color in a conversation like this. So I really just appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Like I said, our liberation is inextricably linked. So where we can make space for each other, we will do so. And I know we have some more topics coming up this season that I'm really, we'll be talking to an Indigenous person, a former coworker of mine, in the next 2 weeks. And I'm really excited to have even those conversations and getting perspective from folks with lived experience. We had to call in a resident white man to come talk about white men.
You are the first white man to be on our show in 3 seasons. So
wow.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah.
Wow.
No. Second, we had Jolly Good Ginger.
Oh yes, we did. That's
so
right.
Second,
yeah. Okay,
second bearded white man.
Yes. Representing.
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bentley. We will see you all next time. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're on all the things.
And find us at Race-Based Live.
And we now have a store on our website if you want to buy a shirt or sweatshirt. Help support the show. Tyshell's wearing one right now.
I love it.
Yay. All right. See you all next time. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, I got to get an outro. Here we go.